Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're right at the top of the hour. We're going to give things probably another minute to let a few more people trickle in, and then we'll get things kicked off here. All right, why don't we go ahead and get things kicked off today? Again, thanks for joining Lightedge for another one of our webinar series. I'm really excited to be moderating today, especially because of the panel that we have here in the topic. We do a lot behind the scenes with AI. We get to do a lot to serve customers in this space. So today we're going to be bringing a couple things together for what Lightedge does behind the scenes related to AI, how we're helping organizations with it, and again, really excited by the three gentlemen that are joining me. My name is Michael Hannon. I'm the CISO for the organization. So all things security and compliance, but have had my hands in just all things IT over the last 7 years with the organization. I'd love to let the guys kind of give a few seconds intro of themselves, and then we can get things kicked off. Aiden, you want to start us off?
Sure, thanks, Michael. My name is Aiden Quinn. I'm mainly working in the hyperscaler atmosphere, but I'm an engineer and an architect, and I work a lot with AI projects, especially that are customer focused. So customers will bring us on to help them kind of decide how they can find a way to make their use cases come to life, and then I'll help augment their team to help build it out.
Awesome, thank you. Duncan, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I'm Duncan Wanamaker. I'm with the Lightedge operations architecture team. I've been with Lightedge, I don't know, about 10 years. And, background in virtualization and OpenStack and Kubernetes platforms, but more recently into AI platforms. So I've been architecting some of those for our internal use case.
Awesome. And then Robert, you want to close us out?
Can do. Hey, everybody, Robert Hernandez. I'm a solutions architect here at Lightedge. Forgive me, it is just past 8 in the morning, so I'm going to try to raise the energy here. But spent the last 2 years here at Lightedge as a solutions architect. Prior to that, been in the solutions architecture space for some time now, but actually had a little bit of specific focus around data observability, and data pipelines. So AI is a very natural conversation to have when it relates to all things data, but happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And I would welcome the audience here to submit any questions they have in the chat. We've got a couple people moderating and monitoring that behind the scenes, and they'll funnel those questions in. We want to make sure everybody gets what they want out of this conversation. We'll be kind of going through a progression of, maybe how to be successful with setting up, the chapters of what you're doing around AI. We'll work through decisions on infrastructure, build versus buy, some of the different technology that's out there. So there'll be a progression of kind of how we evaluate things internally or how we support customers. But the group here would love, some feedback and some comments from the audience if you guys have them. And then we're always open to some conversations afterwards. This group could spend hours or days talking about this topic. So we're happy to get on the phone with you all afterwards to just kind of spitball where things are going. The first part of where we want to start, AI is a big topic within companies, especially our own. And when you get investors, board members, executives kind of involved, they can push the conversation in a bunch of different directions. They can, force companies to do different things. They can force you on technology and down different rabbit holes. I think one of the big things that has, been out there for the last couple of months is that MIT report that said, hey, 95% of the initiatives around AI are failing. So we'd probably start there. And Aiden, maybe I'll pose the question to you. Like big picture, why are so many of these projects failing? And it's like, from your perspective, why are they failing on return on investment? Why are they failing on adoption? And maybe how can we think towards changing how these things are started?
Thanks, Michael. What I really see when I'm working with customers that have successful projects versus ones that have projects that kind of stall out and take a while, and that includes when we do these projects internally, is kind of an overhyped expectation off the bat, where people will think that AI will come in and just solve everything instead of setting small definitive goals for their AI project to hit. And when they don't have those small definitive goals, then the scope is not properly set and you can never actually get something that's accountable. And that's when things start to break down. And so a lot of that has to do with knowing what data you have to work with. So having that kind of good data to go with your AI initiative really helps set yourself up for success. So for example, one project we worked on, we decided we were just going to build a chatbot that was going to do everything. And that kind of stalled out. It didn't quite exactly work out the way that we wanted. And we had to narrow that scope to say, well, the chatbot actually is going to only going to do operations or only going to help enable sales. And then we were a lot more successful because now we can quantify exactly what the AI is helping us solve instead of just creating this one blanket big hammer, it's everything. And that kind of has led us to seeing small projects that are very well defined are more successful.
Oh, that's great. And maybe I'll open this one up to the group. Does anyone have any feedback on, especially when you would look at like the leadership group within an organization, what words of advice, building on what Aiden has, would we give them around how to make sure that these things are set up for success, the questions to ask, the people to get involved, and just the overall support that probably needs to be garnered within an organization?
If I may kind of add a little bit, I think one of the biggest barriers of entry for all things AI is kind of the unknowns, right? So for example, one of the things that Aiden had called out was good data. Well, what does good data look like? And I think you can point to all the different things that it's going to vary by organization, but it's also like what does bad data look like? So it's all these little things, it's nuances about your data that you didn't necessarily pay attention to prior because you didn't really need to, right? But I think there's also this kind of underlying, not fear necessarily, but hesitance, right? Like, well, I don't necessarily know what it is that I'm trying to achieve or know what like good data is or know certain aspects of it, but I still have these goals. So like, it's again, taking time to not just understand what you already know, but doing your best to try to uncover things you may not know. And I recognize it's a very broad statement. How do I uncover things that I don't know? And that's, for what it's worth, if I could be so bold, it's one of the reasons why folks like Lightedge get involved, right? We know some of the things that maybe you don't know about.
Absolutely. I'd be self-serving if I didn't ask the question around like the security lens around this. Maybe to the three of you, why should organizations kind of take this, and what thoughts should they have around security at the beginning? And maybe the piece that like we often hear around this is if organizations don't do anything to support these initiatives, users will go find a way to do the things to help make their job and their life easier. So maybe creating an avenue for them that is company sponsored, tied up to the proper data and those types of things. But guys, I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on, with the security lens, why it's important to champion these things and move with some quickness, but also support the proper steps to build these things.
I'll jump in a little bit there and then pass it back here. I think you kind of nailed it. Like, we want to be, when you're in the space, when you're in a leader, like, you want to be an enabler in some capacity when it comes to these types of things. You identified it right away. If you don't, users will find a way, right? It's one of those things where, how can we help make sure people are not being irresponsible with AI, right? So, and again, this all kind of goes back to the earlier point I made about understanding what is responsible AI, what is irresponsible AI. So it's all these little things. But I think, to your point, it's really important for leaders in general to be supportive of this, because again, it's with the understanding that there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of again, like as soon as ChatGPT released, it was like a torrent, right? Everything had an app, everything had AI slapped on it. There's so many things that you just get lost in kind of the void sometimes. And so taking a step back, trying to go, okay, what is even responsible AI to begin with? Again, Aiden's going to talk about it plenty, but having just a tight, and if I may be so bold, kind of a narrow focus to start, like, how do we enable people to use things responsibly? Technology and all the things aside, how are we defining responsible AI use is, I think, really critical, especially early on.
No, that's a great point. And we already have a good question sitting out there in the chat. I'll probably hit that a little bit later down and bring that to the group. When we look at the build versus buy, private versus public models, that's a great question sitting out there. Robert, instead of kind of spending time on why they fail, because I think we've kind of hit that, you brought up a really good point, which is kind of the next segue around data. Organizations in general, Lightedge is no different, have no lack of data. How we use that data it varies across every single organization. I think the things that most organizations are trying to figure out now is how they, I don't want to use the word monetize, but how they use the data they have to help support the things that we're talking about here around AI. And even better, how do you make sure, since this entire thing we're talking about is built on data, how do you get comfort over that the data is complete and accurate? And that there's security controls around it. But Robert, I'd love to kind of pass it to you since you brought up the data aspect of it. Like what makes the data pipeline reliable, and how should organizations think through like the data quality aspects of it?
Sure. Sure. So the quality one's actually a really interesting one, right? So like historically, full disclosure, I didn't touch on this necessarily, but my background is in cloud and infrastructure, right? And so when I as an infrastructure guy think data, my brain immediately jumps to data security or data protection, I suppose, right? So I go to backups, I go to things like that. But there's this kind of mesh that's happening right now between, like, again, business and IT. In fairness, it's been a while, but specifically around this AI stuff, where we're trying to get a good understanding of, again, what data quality even is, right? So to your point, and this is just kind of piecing a lot of things together. So you have a project that you want to do, you want to make a chatbot or something like that, right? And you decide, hey, you know what, we're going to really focus in on making a chatbot for accounting, let's say, right? Okay. Most folks, I think it's fair to say, would just start diving in, right? Deploying infrastructure, starting to connect things. But what really matters here is the data, right? Why does it matter so much? Well, first of all, you're basing everything you have off of data to begin with, right? So what do you need in that data set to actually achieve your particular outcome, right? Data quality isn't necessarily just about one particular aspect either. How accurate is the data? Like, you need to be able to rely on the data that you're feeding into AI, right? If you're feeding your AI or your machine learning a bunch of data that is useless, you're going to get useless answers, right? The old garbage in, garbage out thing. And so admittedly, there's a lot of different aspects to when it comes to data quality, timeliness, consistency. Like there's different aspects that, again, an infrastructure person may not have a ton of experience in. I myself had to learn quite a bit of it. So there's a lot of different aspects to it. But you mentioned specifically a data pipeline. So that's where things get a little bit more interesting, right? So aside from the fact you want to be able to define what quality data looks like, what being able to understand unique values, completeness, et cetera. Well, how do you do that, right? How do you actually see what's going on in your data? And that's typically where like a data pipeline or a data observability pipeline comes in. Now, this is a much broader topic, to be perfectly fair, but the gist of a data pipeline is that you can get an idea of all the different areas where you're generating data, all the places where data is being sent, and all the interactions between, right? So if you have to make changes to the data to facilitate certain data analysts, if you're sending stuff to a security environment, whatever these things look like, a pipeline helps you understand what your data actually looks like. And then from there, theoretically, you could take the time and go, okay, now that I have an idea of where my data is coming from, where it's flowing to, and kind of the interactions in between, how do I make that data better? How do I make that data usable? And so that's when you can really start digging in. Admittedly, again, this is a broad topic because you're trying to encompass a lot of things. But in my opinion, and I think a lot of folks would agree, it really does start with understanding truly your data. And a data pipeline is just one of those ways that you could do that.
Absolutely. No, that's great insight. And Aiden, Duncan, maybe I'll pose this next one to you both, and either one of you go for it. When we think about things, whether it's internally or how we're assisting customers, some people just kind of pause because their fear is the data isn't where it needs to be. And so their first reaction is, well, I need to go make sure it's perfect before I hook anything up to it. Would love your thoughts on, is that the right goal of let's make it perfect versus getting things going and maybe allowing the AI and the things we're building to even cleanse the data as we go? Would love some insight on what you guys are seeing internally and externally around that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you don't have to have perfect data, but you do have to have good data, and it's easy to experiment with. Like, you can take your AI model or, public or private, wherever it's running, and just throw the works at it and see. And you're going to find out, you may hear this term often, garbage in, garbage out. The way that retrieval augmented generation works with AI is it's just going to search for bits and pieces of that data. And if you have a lot of junk in there, it's going to have less of a, quality result. So, you don't have to have it perfect, but you do have to have it, retrieving the correct data and having a visibility of what you're asking questions on relevant, right? The more relevant that data is to your question, the better your answer is going to be. So, it's just going to be trial and error, right? Trying with, because you don't want to spend, a whole year cleansing your data and then, something else comes out, or you didn't need to do that because the model was smart enough or the context window was big enough to answer those questions for you.
If I can kind of add on to that towards the end a little bit, you called out the retrieval augmented generation. I think it's fair to also mention people. It's been a couple of years now since ChatGPT was released, but if we think about some of the early days of ChatGPT, especially before they really allowed you to do that retrieval augmented generation, again, sometimes you'd get some really bananas answers, right? It would get really, because I think at the time there was a kind of a lack of understanding, but ChatGPT was never trying to be correct, at least within the context of large language models and all this. It was just trying to be helpful, right? And so prior to being able to pull in facts from different sources, you could do some really cool things, but it was very let's see what happens. These days, with all the different mechanisms and APIs and all so many different ways to integrate your data, it's even more important now that that data be, again, real nice so that you can actually use the results that you're getting downstream.
And to build off of that, Robert, a lot of the times what really will help you getting yourself ready, even if your data is not exactly where you need to be, is following a good data lake architecture, where you have the unstructured data come in and you can have the AI point at it. And as you get the responses back and you see what is coming back good, what's coming back bad, you can then do your ETL processes on it, or even just assign metadata so that you can get the right kind of sizing, referred to often as chunks of the data. So that way, when you do future searches, things come back the way you want it. Oftentimes, I think what people really start to do is at first it's one chunk size to fit them all. And that doesn't really work. It just depends on what your data sources are, especially in an enterprise situation where your company might have data that was scanned in, for example, in the past. That has to be chunked in a different size than, say, just a regular Word doc that someone's kept up and is really nice and in a good readable format. So having that data come in unstructured and having AI kind of hit that off the bat before you start to learn more and then move it into a structured format will allow you to evolve and grow with it and then iterate and get better and better and better answers every single time.
Oh, that's good stuff, guys. Let's progress the topic a little bit around the compute and architecture choices. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are probably excited for heading into that and then the models and those pieces. Compute's expensive. There's choices around GPUs. You could go cloud, you could go colocation. Obviously, that aligns well. We get to see a flavor of everything related to our customers and what they're doing, and internally we have choices. So maybe Duncan, I may point to you kind of first of with GPU scarcity, rising costs, things going up and down. How should companies evaluate GPU as a service versus buying their own hardware, and maybe what's the thoughts that kind of go into those things?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So the architecture needs for running AI are great. I mean, you have a GPU that has to process all of this in RAM, and the more RAM it has, the more context and the better questions you can ask. But you can start small. There are models that will run on your phone, and that's how I started, deploying some of this stuff at home on Docker containers, on just running on my PC, and you can get started pretty well and do some experimentation that way. But when it comes to enterprise scale and lots of users hitting it at once, you've got some decisions to make. Do you host it privately on your own infrastructure? Do you purchase these GPUs that can be $30,000 or more a piece, for an H100, or do you partner with an enterprise service provider like OpenAI to provide that inferencing for you. And there's decisions to make, but I think that if you're just getting started and you're wanting to try this out, go for a proof of concept. It doesn't have to, you don't have to break the bank. You can spin up these GPU instances on the fly in public cloud. And, you know, a lot of it runs on Kubernetes. Most of it runs on Kubernetes since it's container based. So it's very easy to scale up. And there are open source options if you want to go that route for like VLLM or SGLang that can host on a single GPU 100 users at once and with batch inferencing. So you can really push it pretty far. But you know, it's a lot to consider when you start to get to that enterprise scale. But you can absolutely build these things at home. And it's a good way to just sort of get started and understand some of the challenges that you'll face.
That's one of the most interesting things that I think about the barrier of entry to AI in general, right? To your point, if you have a spare PC and a GPU at home, you could be running large language models from your local PC. It's not going to be necessarily open AI, but you can get some really good results. And that's, I think, both a good and the bad thing, right? It's really easy to just start getting in and start tinkering with it, but it goes back to, well, how do I take it to the next level then? How do I get it into Kubernetes? How can I do things like auto scaling? How can I integrate again other services? It's to me what really is cool about going back to the lowering that barrier of entry though, is also some of the innovation that's taken place too, right? And so one of the things you talked about was, you know, if you're looking at running local models, doing things at the edge, right? Doing things in like dark sites, things where we got to be very, very conscious of security or whatever, being able to have the option to run these complex workloads or complex systems effectively right in my closet. You know, that's really, really cool. And again, being able to partner with another organization or just having these things kind of planned out beforehand, it's a really interesting time to be really diving into AI because you have a lot of options. And again, that barrier of entry in general is fairly low, but it's once you take a step in, well, I have a billion options now. And how do I do things without blowing the bank on everything?
Yeah,
And a lot of people, oh, go ahead, Duncan.
I was just going to say, if you look at the difference between like the closed source hosted models and the open source smaller large language models, I mean, yeah, the training data, the number of parameters they're trained on is a lot less. But now that we're bringing in our own data, you don't need a huge, you know, model that's 1 trillion or 2 trillion parameters. You can do it with a model that runs on a reasonable GPU. You just got to have that link to your live data, and it can actually handle that really well.
Yeah, to build off that, it's much more of an engineering challenge at this point, as we've seen with the different models coming out. Each model, you know, at first when they came out, it was leaps and bounds. It's like, wow, look at this next model. It can do all these things. It's absolutely amazing. But now it's very incremental what's coming out. And people can use these smaller models for specific use cases and get really consistent output. So having good engineering around like queuing up things to be done at different times, depending on if it's a workload that needs to be immediately responded to a user or something that can run in the background, or just understanding how you can scale things up and down based off the rhythm of your work. It's much more of an engineering challenge now than necessarily, can I host the biggest, baddest model that's out there? And a lot of the times the answer is you don't need to do that. You really don't, especially if you're doing something that is a low context window, but it's iterative, it's over and over and over again. You know, sometimes you'll see the examples around that, but the simplest one is just data transformation or message classification. You don't need the biggest model in the world to do that. You just need something that can be well engineered so it can do it over and over and over again. And that's how you can get a lot of success out of it.
If I may, Aiden, quick question, completely side. How would you define, or can you explain what a context window is within the framing of like AI? Because we've said it a couple of times, you know, for my own sake and others as well.
Context is just how much data you're sending to the AI when you ask it a question. A lot of the times there's behind the scene context. So say, for example, I ask an AI chatbot, what's the weather today? So that context is just what's the weather today. But from an engineering perspective, there might be something behind the scenes where the system is also fetching the location of that user, who that user is, and other historical data, so that that context window now grows a bit to what's the weather today? I'm in, X location, and the chatbot knows from previous conversations, I'm trying to plan a trip to the beach. And it could then give you a really slick, smart answer. It's like, hey, the weather at the beach is around you pretty good today. And that's what context is. It's that amount of data that's actually sent to the model to then be processed.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And maybe kind of the last question, unless you guys have any more around like the hardware and build versus buy type component of this. The question that we got from the audience here around security and the thoughts around, private versus public models. Any of you guys want to kind of hit the overlaying in, the context that I may add from my security seat is depends on the type of organization and potentially the data and who's using it. And also, my thought is that within any of these, you can kind of meet the needs from a security perspective, but we'd love your thoughts on like actually implementing and what we're even seeing some of our customers do related to, a lot of them are in highly regulated spaces. Where are their heads at kind of related to this?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So when it comes to security, of course, the general overarching rule of security is surface area. The less players you have involved, the more secure you can end up being, because there's less avenues of attack or even just exposure. For example, if you're going to use a public endpoint, you have to deal with the traffic going over the internet. Something could get in the middle and start looking at any of your data being involved. Or if there's anything that exposes the logs of that company that you're using, that data, then your data can also get out there. Now, if you bring it all in-house, now you have a lot more security conscious ability because it's in a closed network if you do it right. But now it's also all on you to make sure it is secure. And maybe you don't have a large team. And when you use, say, the public ones, you could rely on their security team. And there's certain agreements that you guys have in place. So understanding, what data you're comfortable with possibly being exposed is important, because you could also take a hybrid approach. Maybe you guys have some data that's just, there's no way it can get let out. So you have that stuff hosted internal, and you have models and everything working on that in your closed network, and it's great. But then there's some stuff where it's just everyday use, and it's really nothing different than what people would be Googling, but the chatbot makes it a little more easy to work with. Then you could, for cost reasons, find a different solution that might work better, that has some exposure to the public. So it's kind of weighing that cost and expertise versus what you're willing to expose.
Absolutely.
I think it's certainly worth considering too that if you don't have like an enterprise agreement or subscription to some of these big public models, they offer that for free. I mean, your employees will use it, and they use that data for training, right? So Gemini and OpenAI, they're taking those questions and those documents potentially that you're uploading and using that to train their models. So you might end up with your private data in the training set of a larger model, if you're not careful. So it's another good reason to, control the data yourself, control the models yourself, or to have an enterprise agreement where they're legally saying they're not going to use your data for any training. So
I would also add, go ahead, Aiden.
Real quick, Robert, is when you are using a public endpoint, you don't actually know what you're hitting behind the scenes for them. So oftentimes, if they do updates, something can break, something can leak, something can happen. Whereas if you're doing your own hosting of a private model, unless you definitively go and upgrade or update that model, that's what you have. And so that's a lot of time can help lower the security risk, because it's more steady state. You know exactly what you're working with there. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
No, not at all. That's good stuff. I was just going to add, there's all these different considerations that you guys touched on really well about public, private, network security, all these things. I also think it's fair to point out that there's that soft security as well. Hey, folks, when you are trying to upload a PDF to have it be summarized, use this site or use this tool versus that tool. So it's, again, there's even a level of that user training, right? Hey, folks, responsible AI use, all these different things, right? Like to your point, it's an engineering problem because you can do all these different things, and there's also again the people problem of, okay, folks, we have solved every different avenue, every different way to do this the best way we can, until somebody drags the PDF to the wrong thing, and then suddenly all your stuff, you know what I mean? So there's checks and balances and policies on both ends, and I think that's kind of the important thing here. And if I may, like one of the benefits of like a Lightedge, right, is you can kind of have that best of both worlds where don't worry about the technology aspect, right? There's plenty of different options that provide, and we can engineer that for you. And again, this way you can focus on, hey folks, how do we do these things appropriately? How do we measure success? All these different things, right? So it's a nuanced conversation, and just based on the last 5 minutes alone, it's on both ends.
Yeah, you're 100% right. We're all victims of what's easy. So making sure your solution has the easiest way for people to access your internal data on the safe side of things, so they don't drag and drop somewhere else, helps mitigate that risk.
Yep, and you guys are hitting it. I mean, like generally we solve a lot of things from an engineering perspective. Security landscape, no matter what technology we're talking about, users find a way to go around it and do silly and unauthorized or dumb things. So as much as we can put in place like that, it could be as simple as training. You know, some of the things we've done as an organization, there are multiple platforms out there that can go as simple as just seeing where users are hitting different, you know, public or private models from their, you know, employee or the company-owned asset, to providing Guardrails to point them to the company solution, or also implementing like DLP stuff. It only takes the person to upload a document or, you know, put in customer or employee, you know, confidential or secret information. There are tools out there that can, you know, remove that sensitive information and still keep kind of the time in line with what an expected solution looks like. You don't want to be adding a lot of time to the solution for computation. There's a lot of good solutions out there. Again, you know, you have to think of things from how you build it, but also how users are going to use it. And there's a bunch of different layers that you have to put in place to make sure that we're encouraging them or forcing them to do the right thing. We all, no matter what industry we're in, have some type of sensitive information. So making sure that we're doing the right things important. Okay. That was a great little kind of stint there on the build versus buy. I think kind of the next piece again for a group of engineers or solution architects here that I have, and probably the audience that we have, like the tech stack decision or conversation on what could be done. And this is, there's so many nuances here to like the GPU type to, you know, the networking, the monitoring, the storage, all those different components. You know, maybe Aiden, pointing this one towards you, like what's the biggest overlooked factor on storage throughput, the networking? You know, say someone bought a ton of really expensive gear, but they may have overlooked some, you know, engineering decisions on the back end or cheaped out in certain areas. What's kind of biting people that we can discuss and maybe, you know, provide some, you know, thoughtfulness around?
Honestly, it really comes down to the monitoring. A lot of people are building so fast that they don't have a clear way to kind of see what the consumption is on their AI resources, which if you don't have that, then all the clever engineering in the world won't help you, because you can't actually measure to see if what you're putting in there makes a difference. It's just a feeling. You're like, oh, I updated this and now it's working better, but you don't actually know unless you're monitoring it correctly. And going back to the engineering side and the context window side, really working with your systems to provide as minimal context as possible to get consistent outputs is something people also often overlook as well. They just start going towards the bigger models with the bigger context windows so they can put in as much data at once, but you don't get consistency from that. You don't get good output from that. And you just overrun on your GPU at that point, because you have users uploading hundreds of documents, trying to access hundreds of things all at once. It's not efficient. So understanding how you can take your storage and chunk it down to the right size, and chunk is just breaking up the single piece of data into more digestible sizes for the context. So that way the AI can use it effectively, and monitoring how that goes so you can iterate upon it is, I think, something that a lot of people overlook, including us when we started doing it on our internal projects. We went real Wild West at first, right? And we just built, and it worked great. But then we had to put a monitoring solution in place so we could actually see the gains we were getting from it instead of the throwing more and more resources at it.
I think one of the most interesting things is how almost paradoxical it is, right? Because on the one hand, we spend a little bit of time talking about good data, quality data. You need a certain good amount of data, all these different things. But at the same time, at the consumption end, right? You're like, well, hey, look, that's great that you can throw as much data, but is that consistent? Is that efficient? And so again, it's this, how do I balance, like, well, I know data is important. I know I need a lot of data to train on. What's training versus inference? So again, as you start taking a step back and peeling away all the layers, there's so much going on. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm guilty most certainly of like monitoring being the last thing on the truck, right? It's like, again, you're building, adding these new feature sets, and then you go, okay, well, let's actually monitor it. And then, oh boy, and I take it a step further, even on the monitoring bit, it goes back to, especially if you're unfamiliar, you don't have a lot of expertise in this field or hyperscalers or anything like that. What do I even monitor? You know, like, how do I just hit monitor OpenAI and do I get all the stats? You know, it's really, these are the things that you can very easily overlook, but ultimately, like, at minimum, there are cost implications even, right? So it's such a unique space to be in right now. And again, it's almost paradoxical in a way because it's more but less, you know?
Yeah, I'll echo that sentiment as well about monitoring, and especially like getting feedback from your users, right? Encouraging them to thumbs up and thumbs down unhelpful stuff so that you can go back and review and identify where are the things that maybe we can tweak it and get a better answer in this case, or maybe it's just completely went off the guardrails, which is another thing to consider. Guardrails, like you can have a guardrail system, set up as an API or AI gateway that your users will hit this gateway, and then you can see which user is using the most. But you can also implement guardrails, right? So you can say we don't want answers to include this type of information or that type of information. So just making sure that you have something in there, because it's not just like what other AI they're going to go to. There's prompt injection techniques. There's ways to get answers that we really don't want to give as a organization to our employees. So building considering that as part of that monitoring aspect is very important.
And the human component is so big. So having that feedback loop is so important, because at the end of the day, you're really capturing everybody's process and hoping to use AI to organize it out of something that would be considered like tribal knowledge in the company, known by a few, into a streamlined process that all can use. So having that feedback loop is very important, but also one of those things where if you build your own, you can implement really good feedback loops and you can have control over that, build pipelines off of that to better improve your system, versus if you buy, a lot of those feedback loops are hidden from you and you have to build or use external tools and get a little hacky even to get it to work, so you can get answers from your users on what they're doing instead of having to rely on them manually downloading a chat and sharing it with you, which is what you can often get stuck in when using one of those public endpoints, because at the end of the day, they're a company that wants to keep that feedback loop for their own gain. And so you have to decide, do I want to give that level of control over? And the benefit is you don't have to have as many people on it. They really are focused on the improvement. Or do you want the full control, which comes back to the security question, especially around your data, and then have the ability to iterate and really improve on your end?
I think working in the space for as long as we all have, you see, we've seen technology and stuff and change over the years. I think it's so interesting that you were encouraging feedback to a chatbot, right? There's like getting a result from Chat GPT and going like, hey, if this is good, give it a thumbs up, and not in a subscribe to me on YouTube way, but in a no, every bit of thumbs up, thumbs down actually has downstream impacts to make the thing you're seeing better. That to me is just so fascinating, because I think like in many sales organizations or just organizations in general, right? Feedback, there's all these different scoring mechanisms, blah, blah, blah. Having it now be integrated into, again, your chatbot or to your workflow, having feedback be an important part of the process, I think is I just think it's really interesting, right? Because it's almost real time seeing like, oh, the things that I'm doing, my interactions alone with it are a benefit to it downstream.
Absolutely. And as you know, I've led IT at certain points in my career. Like, there aren't many places where you get real-time feedback on either the solution you're building or a platform you're delivering. And it goes against, the whole social media aspect. Like you said, it's like that's not what this is. But getting good feedback real time of whether or not the thing is working how it should, where it can be better, and then being able to flag that to specific logs so that you can go back and review where it maybe deviated a little bit. There aren't many solutions out there doing it. So like, again, you guys are calling it out perfectly that that's a really big nuance between private versus public. And if organizations have the team that can go make those tweaks that are needed, or if you are, a small team that just wants to trust that, why you're buying a public model is to perform those things for you, and that you don't need visibility into it. You trust that they'll move quick on that, and that the solution will work how you're intending it. If those things are important, again, when you're looking at the matrix of decision, build versus buy, or private versus public, those things are really important. Okay. We did get another question in from the audience here about chunking. So can you share any additional information on the data chunking strategy that was mentioned? Is this being deliberate about docs that you're loading into the RAG, or is this something else?
Yeah, I can take that one. So the chunking is really about getting your data ready for RAG consumption, which it's very important to not just ingest every single document you come in and just set an arbitrary chunking value of a certain size. You can do that off the bat when you're experimenting and learning, but what you'll find is that depending on different types of documents, especially documents that contain any kind of tables or graphs or visuals, the chunking has to be very precise per the type of document. So having your inbound pipeline know how to score the different or classify the different types of documents or sources coming in. So that way a chunking strategy per source can be built out is very important to be successful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, I was just going to continue on that the RAG optimizations, right? Because there are different levels of complexity that you can apply to ingesting your data, right? So one of the most basic ways is to just set it 1,000 characters. This is a chunk, and then 1,001 character to 2,000 is another chunk. So if that splits your documents that way, it might cut a paragraph or a thought or a table completely in half. And when you're using RAG, you're only going to fetch vectors or chunks from your database that you might only fetch 20 out of 1,000 that are available from the documents you've uploaded. So making sure that they align to your data, to the thought process helps. And there are different ways of embedding your documents into vectors, different models, right? Some that look at paragraphs and sentences, but there are even more. There's a whole leaderboard that is used for and to look at for open source models out there that perform differently and better. Speed is another consideration. If you upload a bunch of documents, you don't want to sit around for 5 minutes, waiting for them to be embedded. So just taking into consideration your vector database, how that's set up, what kind of storage it's on, how quick it is. If you're hosting it internally, right? If you're buying a product to still host internally, something like a Glean, or something like that runs on your own infrastructure, that does make that easier. They've done a lot of that work for you. Just consider that there's a cost, per seat on the license for that, and you may still end up be paying tokens out to a public provider for the API costs in the back end, or if you're not buying your own GPU. But yeah, just with GPUs and the models the way they are today, we are still really constrained by how much can fit into the RAM, into that context window. So we are relying on RAG. As models progress and technology improves, we've seen context windows increasing. Right now, we've got open source models that are out there with up to 1 million token context, 10 million if you're looking at Meta's Llama 4. Hopefully they improve that one soon, because of the quality of RAG for that particular model wasn't great. But I mean, it's an evolving thing. So it may end up being that the context in the future is so big that you don't even need to chunk things. You can just throw it all in the model, assuming you have enough RAM. But honestly, I don't think RAG's going anywhere anytime soon, because that much VRAM just to hold that context is going to be ludicrously expensive. So it's an important thing to consider.
I will say, just to kind of, oh, go ahead, Aiden.
Sorry, Robert, I did it again, right? One thing to build onto the context side is, and the chunking, is to make sure you have good metadata that's specific to your domain in your chunking strategy. It's especially important around acronyms, because acronyms can mean 100 different things. So when you're processing the chunks and setting the correct metadata to those chunks, so that when RAG is searching to retrieve it and the LLM is using RAG to retrieve it down the road, having that good metadata in there saying that this acronym means this thing and it's very domain specific can really speed up your searches and your output from the LLM. It does add more time and compute and complexity to the processing of the data to chunk it in the first place, but you get a better output for your users down the road. And a lot of the data that you're uploading doesn't have to be immediately turned around and used in real time, especially if you're connecting it to data sources at an enterprise level. You're processing large quantities of data sources from many different areas, and then they become available to your users. Not necessarily like your users are like, I need this right now and I need everything about it immediately. You do face that as well, though, but that's sometimes where good engineering can come into play, and having a model with a larger context window respond to those versus a model with a smaller context window that's more efficient respond to your RAG type queries that have those better chunks with the better metadata attached to it.
Absolutely. Go ahead,
If I
Robert.
may just to add the last thing here, I think the important kind of overarching theme, at least in my brain for that particular conversation, is how we users, humans, whatever, process data and how AI process data are just entirely different. And what I mean by that is, we're having like this natural language interaction with like a chat GPT, for example, right? So I can say, talk to me about this. There's all these different contexts. However, Duncan called it out, right? If you're chunking your data in such a way that let's say it cuts something off as part of your retrieval, right? Because you're missing that second half of the table or whatever. There is me, the human, going, oh, I just need to turn the page. There is the AI bot going, this was the chunk. And so it's just, again, there's being able to kind of bridge the gap between how we interact with the whatever's on the other end and how we interact with data, how we interact with even just reading a document versus how we get the AI to give us what we expect to, right? It's almost like that implicit versus explicit knowledge, right? Like, well, I know that I can just turn the page, but I need to be able to also tell my chatbot to turn the page too, in a manner of speaking, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, we want to be cognizant of time here, so I'm going to ask this group kind of one more kind of final question. I'll throw it out to the audience that if you have anything else that you want to ask, throw it in chat while we cycle through this last question. And if we get any questions there, we'll answer them. Otherwise, we can close out after this. But you know, the final thoughts from you guys, like this has been a good conversation. And again, like this group, we talk about this stuff every day internally amongst all of us. And we're working heavily on this. We love the conversations we're having with customers. There's a ton of visibility to these projects right now from investors and the executive teams. These can't just be skunkwork projects anymore as much as we want them to be. Now, some stuff can be, but overall, we have to start showing return and success around this. So if you all, and Aiden, I'll pose this to you first, and guys, it's the same question to you after. So if we could give organizations one piece of advice to make sure their AI projects scale responsibly and that there's return on investment for them, you know, maybe some final thoughts you guys have around what that would be to be successful.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that. I think that keeping the human in the loop is the biggest part. A lot of people look to AI as this replacement for people, but really it should be built around augmenting workers, making one worker as effective as 10. You'll find that if you keep that human in the loop and you get that good feedback, then you'll be more successful because you'll actually see what makes your good people better. And having the tools built ahead of time for them that are easy to use and easy to consume and don't frustrate means that they won't go out and find other tools, especially when you go around development. Having a good endpoint available for your developers to build off of, having a good chatbot available for your enterprise users who are doing business type work to build off of. If you give them the tools they need, then they won't go find them somewhere else, because the paradox of good people is they're resourceful. So if you don't give them good resources, they go find them somewhere else, and then you start to bring in the whole can of worms of, well, what are they using? So keeping the human in the loop and giving them that good tool chest of everything they need to build off of, and making sure that tool chest isn't too assumptive, I think is how you create a lot of happy, productive people.
Awesome.
And I think it's very important also to just make sure you know what you're trying to do with your AI. Don't just throw, if we build it, they will come and be successful. You want to know specifically this group of people is doing this repetitive task. It takes them this long, this many hours. After AI, it takes them this many less. And that's something you can quantify and say, we're successful, we're saving X amount of dollars because we've moved the bar on these, these metrics. So get a good understanding of the metrics that you want to improve with AI as you're going, because that'll help justify as you spend more money and time building the solution.
Couldn't agree more.
I think I almost want to take this as an opportunity to, if I were a business and trying to get an understanding of AI and all that stuff, trying to integrate all these different things, there's pressure from board members, the market, et cetera, right? There's all these macro things. Frankly, my advice is use this opportunity right now to tackle your data. Regardless of what tool you use, the methods, your vision, all these different things, it's going to start with your data. And if we're being fair, right now, we have, again, board members are on board, private equity, all these different things are pushing for, we want AI. Great. Use this as the opportunity to get your data estate under control. It's going to make it that much easier to integrate everything you need downstream. You'll know precisely where the data is coming from, where it needs to go. And more importantly, in the age of how do we do more for less, which has been the age since as long as I've been in IT, this is it. This is the time to say, you want these AI goals, you want to have these different things. This is how we need to do it, and tackle that data problem. Get an understanding where all the stuff lives, and then after that, the rest of it, from my perspective, gets that much easier.
Absolutely, and tackling that data problem helps with other places within the business. So it's an absolutely important thing to do. Guys, we did get one more question from the audience. So it's, how do you see MCP changing the need for RAG or other methods of vectorizing relevant data?
So MCP is a useful tool set to expose to your LLM. And I actually think it's one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're building as an organization. Because if you kind of think about all the different front ends or chatbots or interfaces that you go into for a user that are around, they're going to change a lot. You might shift from one to another down the road, but having an MCP that provides consistent tools to those LLMs to be successful are very important. And focusing on that layer and building out that layer is what can make successful agents, really, when you start getting into the AI agent ecosystem. It'll work with RAG, I think, still, because you're always going to want that free form query. But then if you have specific tasks, like you see something that's happening over and over and over again, and you see the same queries happening over and over again of the data, that's when you could bring the MCP layer into the mix to start having those specific queries become a single call. So looking at what your users or your agents are doing and trying to make the MCPs have as few callable tools as possible for each domain specific solution. So if you have like an accounting one, only have a couple accounting MCPs. If you have a sales one, only have a couple sales MCPs. That way you get really consistent outputs every single time.
Yeah, and I think adding MCPs is just kind of like adding, web search to your API or to your LLM. I mean, it's just, fetch me additional information to help answer this question. But MCP sort of enables a lot more than just fetching information. It enables tools that make these things full agents. Like you can give it a task. If you give it an MCP with the proper tools to do the task, it can go and do it. So it really expands the capability of a lot of these models beyond just, do some research for me and give me an answer. It's do some research and then go apply this information that you found out there in the world. So it's going to be a game changer. It's just something that we have to be really cognizant of the security aspect of MCPs, because as they are just being developed, a lot of the integrations and MCPs that are out there are developed by third parties, not the person actually hosting the API that they might be accessing, or it might be hard coding credentials. They're still working on authentication and securing MCPs properly. The work is being done, but it's just something to be very careful about as you jump in, because this is a very rapidly moving and really functional before security kind of technology.
So what I'm hearing is MCP is my first step to finally getting a Jarvis. I have been waiting for Jarvis since Iron Man 2, and this is my step in, finally.
Happening.
Exactly right. Well, I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today. You guys can see that we could keep this conversation going for a while. If we didn't touch upon any questions that you guys have, or there's more you'd like to hear about what we're seeing with customers or what we're doing internally, grab your Lightedge contact or reach out to one of the panelists here. We're happy to have a conversation. And then, guys, I want to thank you three for having a real thoughtful conversation. Again, we talk about this stuff behind the scenes all day. And we enjoy doing it. So thanks for your time. And yeah, hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.